You think you are holding on because you care. But the Buddha taught something far more unsettling. Every moment you refuse to let go, the mind quietly gives up peace, clarity, and freedom. Not tomorrow, not someday, right now. You are not suffering because something left your life. You are suffering because the mind refuses to accept what has already changed. Look closely. Nothing outside is attacking you. The pain is born from resistance. And the longer you cling, the more everything you touch begins to hurt. Be honest with yourself. What you are holding on to no longer exists, except in the mind. The mind does not cling because it is weak. It clings because it is afraid of uncertainty. The Buddha taught that the mind seeks stability in a world that is constantly changing. When something feels familiar, a person, a role, a memory, an identity, the mind mistakes familiarity for safety. It believes that by holding tightly, it can protect itself from pain. But this belief is an illusion. Everything the mind clings to is already moving. Thoughts arise and pass away. Emotions form and dissolve. Relationships shift. Even the sense of I that wants to hold on is not the same from one moment to the next. Clinging does not stop this movement. It only creates tension inside the mind, like trying to freeze a flowing river with your hands. The more effort you apply, the more exhaustion you feel. The Buddha described this tension as the beginning of suffering. Not because the object of attachment is bad, but because the mind refuses to accept impermanence. It wants certainty where none exists. This is why attachment feels heavy. The mind is constantly resisting reality while pretending to protect itself. It believes that letting go will cause loss. But what it does not see is that holding on is already costing it peace. The mind says, if I release this, something will collapse. But the Buddha showed that what collapses is only the illusion of control. When the mind clings, it narrows its awareness. It stops seeing clearly. It reacts instead of observing. It becomes trapped in repetition, replaying memories, revisiting emotions, defending identities that no longer serve it. This is not love. This is not loyalty. This is fear disguised as attachment. The Buddha never asked you to suppress desire or reject life. He asked you to understand the nature of craving, to see that the urge to hold on arises from misunderstanding, not from wisdom. Once this is seen clearly, something subtle happens. The grip begins to soften, not because you forced it, but because the mind recognizes that clinging does not protect it, it exhausts it. And this is the first truth you must understand. You are not suffering because something might leave. You are suffering because the mind refuses to allow things to pass. When this becomes clear, the path to letting go begins naturally, without violence, without struggle, and without fear. Once the mind begins to cling, peace is the first thing to disappear, but it does not vanish suddenly. It fades quietly, almost politely, so quietly that most people do not notice when it leaves. The Buddha taught that peace is the natural state of the mind when it is not disturbed by craving. Peace is not something you create. It is something that remains when grasping ends. But when attachment arises, the mind becomes restless, even in comfortable situations. You can be sitting safely surrounded by silence, yet the mind feels tense. Nothing is wrong in the present moment, but the heart feels unsettled. This is because attachment pulls awareness away from now and traps it between what was and what should be. The mind begins to live in two painful directions at once. It revisits the past, replaying moments that no longer exist. At the same time, it fears the future, imagining outcomes it cannot control. Caught between memory and anticipation, the mind loses its ability to rest. The Buddha described this as agitation, a subtle form of suffering that does not scream but never stops whispering. It shows up as constant thinking, emotional fatigue, and an inability to feel content even when life appears calm. Attachment convinces the mind that peace will return once something comes back or once something changes. But the Buddha revealed a difficult truth. Peace cannot return while the mind continues to demand reality be different from what it is. This is why people feel exhausted without doing anything physical. The mind is constantly negotiating with life. It is silently arguing with impermanence. It is trying to hold still what was never meant to stay. Over time, this struggle reshapes the mind. Awareness narrows. Attention becomes selective. The mind stops seeing clearly and begins seeing emotionally. It magnifies what it fears losing and ignores what is still present. This is how attachment steals gratitude. It makes the mind blind to what remains because it is obsessed with what might disappear. Even moments of joy feel incomplete because the mind is already worried about their end. The Buddha taught that this constant unease is not caused by the world, but by craving itself. Craving does not only desire pleasure, it also desires certainty, permanence, and reassurance. And when these cannot be secured, the mind suffers. What makes this suffering so powerful is that it feels justified. The mind believes its restlessness proves depth, care, or meaning. But in truth, it is simply tension. Peace cannot coexist with clinging. One dissolves the other. This is why the Buddha emphasized awareness rather than control. When the mind sees clearly how attachment disrupts peace, it naturally loosens its grip, not through force, not through suppression, but through understanding. And here lies the second truth. You do not lose peace because life is unstable. You lose peace because the mind refuses to relax its hold on what cannot be kept. Until this is understood deeply, peace will always feel temporary. It will come and go, never staying long enough to satisfy the mind. But once this truth is seen, something shifts. The mind stops fighting change, and peace begins to return, quietly, naturally, and without effort. The Buddha made a distinction that most people never notice. Pain happens once. Suffering is repeated. What hurts you does not stay forever. What stays is the mind's attachment to the experience. Long after the moment has passed, the mind keeps returning to it, turning memory into a living presence. This is why suffering feels endless, not because the event continues, but because the mind refuses to allow it to complete. The Buddha taught that the mind clings to experiences by turning them into stories. It does not simply remember what happened. It reinterprets it, reshapes it, and feeds it with emotion. Each time the story is replayed, suffering is renewed. The mind says, "This should not have happened. This should have lasted longer. This should have been different." These thoughts seem harmless, but they are the fuel of suffering. They keep the mind trapped in resistance to reality. The Buddha called this resistance ignorance, not because the person is unintelligent, but because the mind is unaware of what it is doing to itself. When attachment is strong, the mind confuses memory with reality. It reacts emotionally to thoughts as if they are happening now. The body responds. The heart tightens. The breath becomes shallow. Suffering feels immediate and real. This is why people feel pain suddenly, without warning. Nothing new has happened. Only a thought has arisen, but attachment gives that thought power. The Buddha taught that the mind suffers not because thoughts arise, but because it believes them, because it identifies with them, because it does not see their impermanent nature. Thoughts arise, thoughts pass, but attachment freezes them in place. Over time, this creates a habit. The mind learns to revisit pain automatically. It believes this repetition keeps something alive, a connection, a meaning, an identity. But in truth, it keeps the wound open. The Buddha never encouraged forgetting. He encouraged seeing clearly, seeing that memory is not reality, seeing that clinging to what has passed cannot bring it back, but can only disturb the present. This is where suffering becomes subtle and dangerous. The mind starts avoiding the present moment because it feels empty compared to memory. Silence feels uncomfortable. Stillness feels threatening. The mind would rather replay pain than face impermanence fully. But the Buddha taught that freedom begins exactly here, in allowing experiences to end, not suppressing them, not denying them, but letting them complete naturally. When the mind allows an experience to end, it regains space. When it stops replaying the story, awareness expands. When it no longer identifies with the pain, suffering loosens its grip. And here lies the third truth. You are not suffering because of what happened. You are suffering because the mind keeps returning to it. Once this is seen clearly, something profound changes. The mind begins to rest. Thoughts still arise, but they no longer dominate. Memories still appear, but they no longer wound. This is not detachment from life. This is intimacy with reality. The Buddha taught that when the mind stops clinging to what has ended, it finally becomes available to what is here. And in that availability, suffering has no place to stay. The Buddha warned that attachment does not only create suffering, it quietly reshapes the mind. This is the danger most people never see. At first, attachment feels emotional, then it becomes habitual. Eventually, it becomes identity. The mind begins to define itself by what it holds. A person, a role, a past version of life, a story of loss or longing. Without realizing it, the mind says, "This is who I am because this is what I cling to." The Buddha taught that this is where suffering deepens. When attachment becomes identity, letting go feels like annihilation. The mind is no longer afraid of losing something, it is afraid of losing itself. This is why clinging feels so intense. The fear is not about the object, it is about emptiness. The mind senses that without attachment, there is nothing solid to stand on. But the Buddha revealed a radical truth. There was never anything solid there to begin with. The self that clings is not fixed. It is a process, a collection of thoughts, sensations, memories, and reactions arising and passing moment by moment. Attachment tries to freeze this flow and turn it into something permanent. When the mind resists this truth, tension becomes constant. Even when nothing painful is happening, there is an undercurrent of anxiety. The mind feels incomplete, unfinished, always waiting for something to return or resolve. This is how clinging steals vitality. The mind becomes heavy. Curiosity fades. Presence weakens. Life feels repetitive, not because life is dull, but because the mind is trapped in its own fixation. The Buddha taught that attachment narrows awareness. It pulls attention inward toward what is missing, rather than outward toward what is unfolding. The world continues to change, but the clinging mind does not move with it. Slowly, the mind becomes rigid. This rigidity shows up in subtle ways: difficulty adapting, resistance to new experiences, emotional reactivity, a constant sense of inner pressure, as if something is always unfinished. The Buddha described this as bondage, not bondage imposed by the world, but bondage created by the mind itself. Clinging promises safety but delivers confinement. It offers familiarity but takes freedom. It pretends to preserve meaning but actually prevents growth. What makes this bondage so difficult to escape is that it feels personal. The mind says, "This is my pain. This is my story. This is who I am." But the Buddha taught that suffering begins to loosen the moment this identification is questioned. When you observe the mind closely, you see that attachment is not you. It is something happening in awareness. It arises, it intensifies, and it fades when not fed. The moment the mind stops identifying with attachment, space appears, not emptiness, but openness, not loss, but possibility. And here lies the fourth truth. You do not lose yourself by letting go. You lose yourself by clinging. Clinging freezes the mind in a past that no longer exists. Letting go allows the mind to move again, to breathe, to respond, to live. The Buddha taught that freedom is not the acquisition of something new, it is the release of what binds. When the mind sees this clearly, attachment weakens, identity softens, suffering loosens its grip, and for the first time in a long while, the mind begins to feel light again. The Buddha taught that attachment is dangerous, not because it hurts loudly, but because it steals quietly. Most losses announce themselves. Attachment does not. It takes without asking, without warning, and without leaving clear evidence behind. This is why people live for years without realizing how much has already been taken from them. The first thing attachment steals is presence. When the mind clings, it is rarely where the body is, even while walking, eating, or speaking. Awareness drifts backward into memory or forward into fear. Life continues, but you are only partially there. Moments pass, but they do not fully register. The Buddha warned that when presence is lost, life becomes thin, experiences lose depth, joy feels fragile, silence feels empty instead of nourishing. The mind is always leaning towards something else. Then attachment steals energy, not physical energy, but mental vitality. The mind becomes tired without effort. You wake up exhausted not because you worked too hard, but because the mind never truly rested. It spent the night replaying, resisting, and imagining. The Buddha described this as a mind that cannot settle. Even when nothing is demanded of it, it feels burdened. The weight comes from holding what was never meant to be carried indefinitely. Next, attachment steals discernment. When the mind clings, it loses the ability to see clearly. It exaggerates what it wants to keep and minimizes everything else. It confuses familiarity with truth. It mistakes emotional intensity for meaning. This is why people stay attached to situations that harm them. The mind becomes loyal to its own suffering because it believes letting go would leave nothing behind. But the Buddha taught that this belief itself is suffering. Attachment also steals openness. The clinging mind resists new possibilities. It compares everything to what was. New relationships feel shallow. New experiences feel unsatisfying. Nothing measures up. Not because life has less to offer, but because the mind is already full. Full of memory, full of expectation, full of resistance. A full mind has no space for peace. The Buddha emphasized that suffering is not only pain, it is limitation. Attachment limits how fully you can meet life. It reduces the range of feeling. It dulls sensitivity. It makes the mind defensive instead of receptive. And perhaps the most subtle loss is this: attachment steals trust in change. The mind begins to see change as a threat rather than a natural process. Impermanence feels hostile. Uncertainty feels dangerous. The heart tightens whenever things shift. But the Buddha taught that change is not the enemy. Resistance to change is. When the mind no longer trusts impermanence, it cannot relax. It lives as if something is always about to be taken away. Even good moments feel anxious because they are expected to end. This is how attachment poisons happiness. It does not allow joy to be complete because it is already mourning its loss. And here lies the fifth truth. You do not lose life suddenly. You lose it gradually through absence, exhaustion, narrowing, and fear. The Buddha did not ask you to abandon life. He asked you to abandon the grip that keeps you from living it fully. When the mind sees what attachment costs, not dramatically but daily, something softens. The urge to cling weakens. Not because you forced it, but because the price has become clear. And in that clarity, the mind begins to open again. Not all at once, not dramatically, but gently, And with that gentleness, a deeper peace becomes possible. The Buddha understood something about the mind that most people never see clearly. The mind does not fear pain as much as it fears emptiness. This is why letting go feels so threatening. It is not the loss itself that terrifies the mind. It is the space that appears when attachment loosens. The mind looks into that space and does not know who it will be there. Attachment gives the mind a shape, a direction, a story to inhabit. Even when the story is painful, it feels familiar. The mind knows how to exist inside suffering. It has learned its contours. It knows where to stand. But when letting go begins, that structure weakens. The mind feels exposed. The Buddha taught that this moment is often misunderstood. People think they are losing meaning, love, or identity. In truth, they are losing the illusion of solidity. Everything the mind clings to feels solid because it is repeated. The story is told again and again. The emotion is revisited. The memory is replayed. Over time, repetition creates the feeling of permanence. Letting go interrupts this repetition. And when repetition stops, the mind feels as if something essential is disappearing. This is why the ego resists so strongly. The ego is not an enemy. It is simply the mindset's attempt to create continuity in a world of constant change. It clings so it can say, I am this, I was this, I will remain this. The Buddha taught that this attempt is doomed to fail because nothing in experience remains fixed. Not feelings, not roles, not identities, not even consciousness in the way we imagine it. When the mind senses this truth approaching, fear arises. The fear is subtle at first. It appears as restlessness, as doubt, as a sudden urge to distract, as the desire to revisit old memories or emotional pain. The mind would rather feel something familiar than face the unknown. This is why people return to suffering. They understand instead of freedom they have never experienced. The Buddha called this craving for becoming, the urge to be something, someone, anything, rather than resting in openness. Letting go threatens this craving. When attachment loosens, the mind briefly touches a state without reference points. There is no clear story, no familiar role, no emotional anchor. This moment feels like falling. But the Buddha taught that this falling is not into nothingness. It is into awareness without grasping. The problem is that the mind has rarely rested there. It does not recognize this state as safe. So it panics and reaches for something to hold. This is where many people turn back. They mistake fear for danger. They assume letting go is harmful because it feels uncomfortable. But the Buddha taught that discomfort is not always a signal to stop. Sometimes it is a signal that something false is dissolving. The dissolution of attachment feels intense because it exposes the mind's habit of identification. The mind realizes how much of its sense of self was built around what it held onto. When that support weakens, the mind feels ungrounded. But the Buddha emphasized that this ungroundedness is temporary. If the mind does not immediately grasp again, something remarkable happens. Awareness begins to stabilize on its own, not around an object, but around presence itself. This is why the Buddha spoke of liberation not as an acquisition, but as a release. Nothing new is added. Nothing mystical is imported. Nothing external is required. The mind simply stops contracting around craving. At first, this feels unfamiliar. Quiet can feel loud. Stillness can feel empty. The absence of emotional struggle can feel strange. The mind asks, "What do I do now?" The Buddha's answer was simple: nothing. Rest, observe, allow. Let experience arise and pass without interference. In this allowing, the mind begins to trust reality again. It learns that it does not need to hold in order to exist. It learns that awareness itself is stable, even when objects change. This is the turning point. The fear that once felt overwhelming begins to soften. The urge to grasp weakens. The mind realizes that letting go does not erase it. It reveals a deeper steadiness underneath. The Buddha taught that this steadiness was always there, hidden beneath layers of craving and resistance. It was never created by attachment. It was only obscured by it. As this steadiness becomes familiar, freedom stops feeling like loss. It begins to feel like relief. The mind no longer needs to define itself through what it holds. It does not need to replay the past or secure the future to feel complete. It simply knows. And here lies the sixth truth. Letting go feels like death only to the part of the mind that was never real to begin with. What dies is illusion. What remains is clarity. This is why the Buddha did not promise comfort on the path. He promised freedom. And freedom at first can feel unsettling because it removes the walls the mind once leaned against. But once the mind learns to stand on awareness itself, it no longer fears openness. It rests. And in that rest, suffering has nothing to cling to. The Buddha taught that letting go is not the end of something. It is the end of confusion. Most people imagine that when attachment ends, something important will be missing. They fear emptiness, loneliness, or meaninglessness. But the Buddha revealed a truth that feels impossible to understand until it is experienced directly. When attachment falls away, nothing essential is lost. What is lost was never essential to begin with. Attachment does not give life meaning. It gives life tension. Meaning arises naturally when the mind is clear, present, and unburdened. But as long as the mind clings, it cannot recognize this. It mistakes emotional weight for depth. It confuses intensity with truth. The Buddha taught that when clinging ends, the mind does not collapse. It opens. At first, this openness feels unfamiliar. The mind is no longer driven by craving or fear. It is no longer pulled backward by memory or pushed forward by desire. For the first time, it rests fully in what is. This resting is not dullness. It is alert calm. It is awareness without struggle. The Buddha described this state as freedom, not because pain never arises, but because pain no longer controls the mind. Experiences come and go, but they no longer leave deep marks. Joy is enjoyed fully. Loss is felt honestly. Nothing is denied, and nothing is clung to. This is what remains when attachment dissolves. Clarity. Clarity allows the mind to see impermanence without fear. It no longer demands that life stay still. It moves with change instead of fighting it. The mind becomes flexible, responsive, and gentle. The Buddha taught that this clarity brings compassion. When you no longer cling to your own suffering, you no longer project it onto others. You stop demanding that people complete you. You stop expecting life to behave according to your fears. Love becomes lighter. Relationships become freer. Presence deepens. Letting go does not make you distant. It makes you honest. You meet people as they are, not as you need them to be. You experience moments fully, without trying to freeze them. The Buddha emphasized that this is not detachment from life, but intimacy with reality. When the mind stops resisting impermanence, it becomes deeply alive. Suffering no longer defines experience. It passes through without staying. The mind learns something revolutionary. It does not need to hold in order to be whole. This understanding changes how you live. You stop chasing closure. You stop demanding certainty. You stop asking life to promise permanence. Instead, you learn to trust the flow of experience. The Buddha taught that trust does not come from belief. It comes from seeing clearly, again and again, that clinging always leads to tension, and release always leads to ease. When the mind truly understands this, it stops arguing with reality. Silence becomes nourishing instead of uncomfortable. Stillness feels spacious instead of empty. The present moment becomes sufficient. And here lies the final truth. You were never losing anything by letting go. You were losing everything by refusing to. Peace was never absent. It was covered. Freedom was never distant. It was buried beneath grasping. When the mind releases what it was never meant to carry, what remains is not nothingness, but simplicity, breathing without resistance, feeling without fear, living without constant negotiation. The Buddha did not promise that life would become painless. He promised that suffering would no longer be necessary. This is the end of clinging and the beginning of peace. Sit with this understanding. Do not rush past it. Let it settle, because the mind that truly lets go does not need to search anymore. It has arrived. The Buddha never asked you to fight the mind. He asked you to understand it. Everything you thought you were losing was never taken from you. It was only revealed to be impermanent. Suffering did not come from change. It came from resisting what had already changed. When you stop holding, nothing collapses. The struggle ends. The mind no longer needs to protect itself. It no longer needs to replay, justify, or chase. It rests. Letting go is not forgetting. It is seeing clearly, not pushing life away, not clinging to it, just allowing it to move. The Buddha taught that peace is not found by adding anything, but by removing what burdens the heart. So loosen the grip, gently. What remains is enough, breath by breath, moment by moment. This is the end of clinging and the beginning of peace. Sit with this. Let it settle. You don't need to go anywhere else.